Welcome back, Endgame community. Thanks for joining us as always. We're going to talk a little strategy today. You know, we mock all offseason long, and a lot of times Travis Kelce, you remember league winning Travis Kelce from a year ago, is a first round pick. But should he be? Because if you're going tight end early, that will affect your roster construction the rest of the way. It's a debate we have all the time. Chris, let's settle it once and for all. Is Travis Kelce worth a first round pick? So let's start with that. Are you taking him in the first round? Depending on the format, of course, let's just assume it's not a tight end premium or anything like that, but it's in a standard redraft league, PPR. Is Travis Kelce worth a first round?
Yeah, I absolutely worth the first round. I mean, if you look at last year, even if you ignore the advantage you had at tight end with Travis Kelce, he was the overall number 6 scorer outside of QBs. And he was, if you look at him at like other wide receivers, he was number 3. And if you look at him running backs, he was number 4. So it's not like you're taking a tight end who was, you know, the 20th scorer just because he has an advantage at tight end. So you're getting a guy who was a top 6 fantasy scorer who's also a massive advantage at the tight end position. And look, in these one tight end leagues where you have to start a tight end, that is so vital to have that, you know, like you have an advantage nobody else has really, right? Even somebody who drafts, let's say Alvin Kamara, you know, if you were able to get, you know, somebody halfway decent running back in the second round, the advantage Alvin Kamara had over your RB is probably not the advantage you had with Travis Kelce over their tight end. So should he be a first rounder? Yeah, because again, top 6 scorer, huge advantage at his position, definitely should be a first rounder.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. The thing is, we talk about league winners, a guy who can help you not just throughout the season, but down the stretch where it counts, the consistency, the dominant at his position, everything is there. Kelce fits the bill to a T. I was asked, you know, several different ways and times, you know, who do you think was the fantasy MVP last year? We even talked about it, you know, once the season wrapped up. And the answer is Travis Kelce, to be honest, because even though Kamara had that amazing game, you know, he had his ups and downs. Kelce did both. He was amazingly consistent and he was dominant down the stretch. Look, from week 8 on, he didn't have a single game with less than 7 catches. Just think about that in PPR, that floor. At least 7 catches every game in the second half of the season. And then during the fantasy playoffs, depending when you start, week 13 through 16, he scored a touchdown in every game in addition to those 7 or more catches, and he averaged 109 yards per game. That's what you want out of your, you know, stud player. And it's a tight end in a position where basically after the first 5 or 6 guys, you know, you're just mixing and matching. They're interchangeable. Any of those guys could just flop on a given week. All right, so now that we've established that Kelce is definitely worth an early pick, here's the question. How do you go from there? How do you pivot? Because once you go tight end early, that means you're not taking a running back. And of course, we see in most mocks, maybe not our endgame mocks because we have a pretty smart crowd here, but everyone's just going running back, running back, running back. If you're missing on that early running back run, you're not getting one of those top 10 or even 12 guys. Does that hurt you down later on as far as your roster construction?
I mean, it can. It definitely makes it tricky. And of course, every league is different. But if you're in like more of a, you know, the type of league where running backs tend to go very early, which they do in most leagues, and it definitely can because, you know, like you said, you're not going to get one of those elite top tier running backs. So you have to understand that, again, like I said, Travis Kelce would have been the RB4 last year. So it's not like you're taking a scrub in the first round just because he's an advantage of the tight end. So you have to be able to accept the fact that, hey, I have a massive advantage at tight end. Okay. You know, the other people have a big advantage at running back. It's just the way it is. You can't have an advantage everywhere, right? It's just not going to happen. So you just have to understand that, do the best you can, know that that's where your advantage is going to be, and try to find those running backs in the middle parts of the draft, the later parts of the draft, who can, you know, at least hold the fort down enough to where the advantage that your opponent has at running back is not as significant as the advantage you have at tight end.
Right. And you shouldn't ever feel like you have to take a certain position just to have one. But I know we're going to get asked, and we've been asked this, okay, if you go tight end like Travis Kelce early, does that mean you should target a running back in round 2 so that you don't miss out. You don't, wind up with a kind of a lesser guy as your starting running back, because let's say you pick 10th, right? That's a good spot where Kelce typically goes. Well, if you pass on running back in round 2 by taking a top receiver, that's a strong build. But by the time it comes back to you in round 3, the top 20 running backs are probably gone. So does that mean you're almost committing to a 0 RB build to some extent? Do you feel like you should go running back, or just not worry about it and take best player available?
Yeah, you can't ever go into the draft saying, I'm going to take this guy or that guy or this position or that position, because you just don't know. Like, I just did a best ball draft where I did take Travis Kelce at number 10, and then Nick Chubb was there in the second round, so I took him. But, if Nick Chubb wasn't there and I'm staring at, let's say, Stephon Diggs or DeAndre Hopkins versus guys like maybe, I don't know, Miles Sanders, Joe Mixon, those kind of running backs, I'm not going to take those running backs over those receivers just so I can have a running back. I'd rather just, say, okay, fine, I'm going to have a stud tight end, I'm going to have a stud wide receiver, and I'm going to be a little weak at running back, but hey, everybody's going to be weak somewhere. Nobody's coming out of the draft stacked at every position unless you're in some 6-team league or some 12-team league where everybody's, noobs and you're the only guy who knows what he's doing. Everybody's going to have a weakness somewhere. You have to accept that. So don't just draft somebody just to be like, okay, I got somebody at that position, because now you're going to have more than one weakness. So really it comes down to, your draft and how it's going. And like I said, you can't ever go into the draft saying, I'm going to take this guy, then I'm going to take this guy, because you just don't know. Like, you might, like I said, Nick Chubb might be sitting there and you're like, oh, okay, let me get Nick Chubb. Or there might not be any running backs left and you have to go wide receiver. So I guess the answer is it really depends.
It does always depend. I mean, every draft plays out differently. You think you know what's going to happen, and there's always a curveball thrown in there. But yeah, I mean, you think about it this way: would you rather take maybe the number 1 or 2 wide receiver, or the RB 13 or 14, depending on who's left? Yeah, don't take a running back just because you feel like you need to. Now let's look at the flip side. What if you don't get Travis Kelce, either by choice or just the way it plays out? So like, if you have a top 5 pick, again, unless you're playing in a league that's a tight end premium, that's too early. You're not taking Kelce with a top 5 pick. He's not going to fall probably in the second round back to you. Let's say you don't get, either Kittle or Waller, one of those top tight ends. They just the way it played out, either by choice or just you weren't able to grab them because someone else did. So if you don't go tight end early, especially with Kelce round 1, is it best to just wait and get a tight end later? How late do you wait on a tight end? Because, a lot of people say, well, there's not a lot of difference. Once you get past those big 3, they're all the same. I don't know if that's necessarily true, because I think there's a pretty big difference between the tight end 12 and, let's say, the tight end 5. You get somebody solid like TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews. But do you have a specific philosophy on that, as far as, let's say you don't go a tight end early, then what are you doing later on?
Yeah, generally my philosophy is if I don't get a tight end early, I'm probably grabbing somebody in that like Noah Fant, Dallas Goedert, Irv Smith, Mike Gesicki range, which is in like rounds 9 through 11-ish. Because if you look at TJ Hawkinson last year, he wasn't being drafted as a number 4 tight end or a number 3 tight end, right? He was a guy you got like in those middle rounds. And same with like guys like Robert Tonyan, Logan Thomas. I don't even think was being like Robert Tonyan and Logan Thomas weren't even drafted in most drafts last year. You can get them off of waivers. There's always tight ends like that come out of nowhere. It's just such an incredibly difficult position to predict that if I miss out on those first 3 guys, I'd rather just wait and just take my chances elsewhere. And if I miss, like if I draft Noah Fant in round 9 or round 10 and he ends up busting, it's not a huge deal. I can drop him and pick up another tight end, and it's not going to derail my season. But if you take TJ Hawkinson in, say, like round 4 or round 5, and you're passing on, like DK Metcalf was a 5th rounder last year. We see these 5th rounders every year. It seems like David Montgomery was a 5th rounder last year. Like, if you're passing on those guys for a tight end who busts, that's going to really, really impact your season. So I'd rather just wait later on, grab a guy who I like. And if he busts, okay, he busts. I drop him. I pick up another tight end off waivers. But yeah, it's just not worth it, in my opinion, to invest high draft capital in any other tight ends outside of the top 3.
Yeah, so I mostly agree with that. I mean, I do think, as we've said, Kelce is worth the early pick. If you get Kittle or Waller, I'd say early round 3, maybe the end of round 2, just depending on how the draft plays out. then I think that's solid too. I don't want to be the last guy to take a tight end, just because I think there is a drop off. Like you said, there's always going to be a guy who comes out of nowhere. Like you said, Tunyon or Logan Thomas. So I think if you're not going to go early at tight end, you might as well just wait. But I don't want to be the guy who waits and gets the last tight end left, because then I might as well just not take a tight end at all and just stream the position. And I really don't want to do that. So I feel pretty good taking one of those top 5 guys. So again, if I miss on Kelce, or if I just choose not to get Killer Waller early, I'm going to kind of target those intermediate guys, like you mentioned, Fant or Hawkinson. I'm okay with Goddard. I'm kind of down on Andrews. Now you are too. So I would rather get one of those guys at the right cost. If tight ends are flying off the board too early, then I'll just wait, right? But I'd rather get one of those guys and feel at least pretty secure that I have a second tier guy than to wait and then I get stuck with, Austin Hooper as my starting tight end. Nobody wants that. So it's not necessarily an all or nothing proposition. But again, you just always have to be smart about it. Don't feel like you have to take somebody just for the sake of taking somebody. Is Travis Kelce worth a first-round pick? Are you targeting him early? Let us know. Hit us up with a comment and tell us about your philosophy on tight ends on draft day. All right, hit us up with a comment and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.